and welcome to ISO Buckets. I'm your host, Nate Friesen. Thanks for downloading and listening to the show. If you want to be notified when a new episode drops, make sure you subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Also, feel free to follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at ISO Buckets. So, over the past few weeks, I've been talking about the 2020 free agent class, and so far we've gone through the top 15 point guards, shooting guards, and small forwards. So today we'll continue that by looking at the top 15 free agent power forwards, and then I'll finish off next week by looking at the free agent centers. And that'll do it for the free agents. I'm not entirely sure yet what I'm going to look at after this kind of free agent overview. Maybe we'll have some more news and potentially the season might be coming back soon, so just kind of going with the flow as the NBA is kind of up in the air right now. With that being said, let's get started with the top 15 free agent power forwards. So as I've mentioned, every single position of the free agent class I've broken into 4 tiers. So the first tier, as always, has been All-Stars. And the only All-Star in this free agent power forward class is Anthony Davis. So Anthony Davis has a player option for $25 million. Absolutely going to turn that down. He can get significantly more than $25 million this summer. The real question is how many years is he signing for and who is he signing with? I think it's almost a guarantee that he's signing with the Lakers. He's somewhat T Chicago, maybe going home, but that doesn't seem likely. I think he maneuvered his way to the Lakers for a reason, and I think he'll stick to it, and he'll most likely go back. I think that's the best chance he has to win a championship, which seems to be what he values at this point. I think the real question is how many years is he going to sign for? Davis has been somewhat injury prone throughout his career, so it might be smart of him to kind of lock down a 5-year max deal. But also, he is kind of teammates with LeBron James, who for pretty much his entire career signed his 1+1 1 year, and then 1 year with the player option deals. And if Anthony Davis does end up going with the 1+1 option, that would match up his contract with LeBron's, and they would both be free agents at the end of next year, with a player option the year after. So that might make sense for Anthony Davis. If I had to guess, that's likely what he'll do. I don't think, he's still so young, I don't think he's really too concerned about locking up long term. He's already made so much money in his career, and let's just hope he doesn't have any sort of serious career-ending injury. Obviously no one wants that. I think it'll likely make most sense for Davis to sign the 1+1, and possibly win a championship in the next 2 or 3 years. Kind of see how LeBron ages, and if after these next 2 years, if it's not kind of working or they haven't won a championship, or even if they have, if LeBron seems to be kind of nearing the end, maybe Davis wants to leave, go somewhere else, pair with another younger star, or he wants to stay and kind of build the Lakers around him from there on out. Either way, I think the 1+1 option will give Davis so many more options. If he signs 5 years, he's just kind of locking himself in and setting himself up for another scenario that he had, like in New Orleans, where he was kind of asking out halfway through the contract, basically. So as I mentioned, Davis, the only guy in the All-Star tier for the free agent power forwards. So let's move on to tier 2, which is the starting level players. So the first guy in this tier is Serge Ibaka, the Toronto Raptors. He's an unrestricted free agent this offseason. He had one of the best years of his career this season, but he was getting paid roughly $21 million this year, so I don't think he's going to justify that in another contract. He's already 31 years old, so he'll likely look to sign for cheaper, more long-term, just kind of lock down that security nearing the end of his career. I think something in the 4-year, between $40 to $60 million would make sense for Serge. That's roughly like $10 to $15 million a year. I mean, it's possible he could get a bit more, but unlikely. I mean, I think it would probably be smart for a team to sign him to maybe something that starts higher and declines as the contract goes on, just because you never know. I mean, Serge Ibaka could be the type of guy that doesn't age well, although he's aged pretty well so far. I don't know. Yeah, I don't think it's honestly likely that he re-signs with the Raptors. It seems like the Raptors are sort of gearing up for Giannis in 2021, and so signing Serge Ibaka to a long-term deal would not fit with that plan. So if the Raptors want to re-sign Serge Ibaka, it would likely have to be on a one-year deal. But as I mentioned, Serge not likely wanting to sign a one-year deal. It doesn't seem like the Raptors and Ibaka are going to be a fit anymore. I mean, with that being said, Ibaka seemed to love his time in Toronto, so I think it's definitely possible that he goes back, even if it's just on a one-year deal, just because he loves Toronto. And then he could always reevaluate and sign for a really cheap, longer-term deal next year, once the Raptors have potentially signed Giannis or not signed Giannis. Because then there would be a little bit more clear picture of where Serge would fit into the team. But if he does end up leaving, I think teams like maybe the Celtics, the Spurs, or the Pelicans could be good potential fits for Ibaka. I think, especially the Celtics, they kind of need a center. I think Serge Ibaka would be a good 3-and-D center, which are pretty rare in the NBA. And I think he would fit pretty well with that team. I mean, he's a veteran. He's been in the playoffs. He's won a championship. He's been to the finals twice. Once with OKC and once with the Raptors. I think he's the kind of guy that would. He's just a good fifth starter on a championship team. I think he's proven that multiple times. So yeah, I think the Celtics would probably be the best fit for Ibaka if he does decide to leave Toronto. So the next guy on the starters tier is Derek Favors. Derek Favors, another unrestricted free agent, still only 29 years old, so he could potentially sign a short-term deal for a lot of money. I mean, he was getting paid over $18 million this year, so I doubt he's going to get that much again. But I mean, anything's possible. Don't see him being really a fit with the Pelicans just because they have Zion, and having Derek Favors and Zion Williamson in the same front court really doesn't make sense at all. There's just no spacing there, and I mean, the lane is just going to be really clogged for Brandon Ingram and Lonzo Ball, and Josh Hart and JJ Redick. They're just going to have no, and Drew Holiday, they're going to have no driving lanes with those two guys just clogging the paint all the time. So I think if Derek Favors could potentially look for a couple options. I mean, he could sign a short-term deal with kind of a younger team for a lot of money, like the Sacramento Kings. I think he could be a good veteran center for them. Just kind of maybe a 1-year, $15 million contract with the Kings could work. Or he could go for kind of a cheaper deal on a long-term contract with a contending team or a borderline contending team, come off the bench, maybe the Pacers. Could be a suitable fit for Favors. So I think Derek Favors will have no shortage of suitors this offseason for sure. So the next guy on the starters tier, somewhat of a borderline starter. This guy's Bobby Portis. So Portis has a team option with the Knicks. The Knicks would honestly really be smart to not pick up this option. I mean, it's for $15 million. So unless they literally, once again, last summer, have no one to put their money on, and they just are okay, let's just sign Bobby Porter and Taj Gibson and Wayne Ellington and just a bunch of Marcus Morris and a bunch of random guys to way too much money, just because they have nowhere else to put their money. That's kind of the only scenario where I see the Knicks picking up that option. But if not, I mean, he'll most likely sign with another young bad team for as much money as he can. It just seems like that's kind of his spot in the league right now. Potentially the Knicks again, maybe on a slightly cheaper deal, or they pick it up. The Hawks maybe. He could be a backup center for them. Maybe the Suns. I mean, I think the Suns actually might be a decent fit. I think coming off the bench behind DeAndre Ayton might actually be like a decent spot for him. So the next guy in the starters tier is Paul Millsap, another unrestricted free agent. Someone appears to be nearing the end of his career at 35 years old, but he can certainly still provide solid veteran leadership and really solid defense at the 4 or 5 spot for a team. I mean, if he's going to go back to the Nuggets, it's going to have to be on a significantly cheaper deal. I believe he was making something like $35 million last year. So at age 35, I mean, he just really doesn't justify that price tag. So I think he could possibly go back to the Nuggets on maybe like a 1 or 2 year deal at $8 to $12 million a year, roughly. And if not the Nuggets, another contending team could certainly use him. Maybe like the Warriors or the Rockets, who kind of like playing that small ball lineups. I mean, he could be a really good small ball 5 for teams like that. Or maybe even the Raptors if he wants to sign like a 1 year, like I said, $8 to $12 million contract with the Raptors, just to kind of fill that Serge Ibaka role if Ibaka does end up leaving the Raptors. I think that could actually be a really solid fit. I mean, he could definitely play the 5, especially beside a guy like Pascal Siakam or PJ Tucker or Draymond Green. I mean, I think that would just kind of be like a really ideal fits for Paul Millsap, especially if he's willing to sign a cheaper deal to play for a contender. So the next guy in the starters tier, Marcus Morris, another unrestricted free agent, was getting paid $15 million last year. Another one of those guys that the Knicks just kind of threw a bunch of money at because they didn't know what to spend it on. And he was eventually traded to the Clippers. I mean, it's unclear if Marcus Morris just kind of wants to lock up as much money as he can, or if he wants to play for a contender. I mean, he kind of got to do both last year, which seems to be kind of a smart play these days. Just kind of sign for as much money as you can and then just ask to be bought out when it comes to the buyout market time, and then a contending team can just pick you up. Or like Marcus Morris, that was just I mean, he just played so well that he garnered actually being traded as opposed to just being bought out by the Knicks. So I mean, who really knows what Marcus Morris is going to do? I mean, if he wants to play for a contender, I think he could still justify like similar to Millsap, $8 to $12 million, potentially for a team like maybe the Rockets, the Nets, the Sixers. I mean, these teams could definitely benefit from a guy like Marcus Morris. Maybe even the Clippers could re-sign him. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility at all, but I think it really depends what Marcus Morris wants to do. If he wants to do what he did last year and take as much money as he can from like a bad team, or if he wants to take a bit of a pay cut to sign with a contender and actually have a chance to win a championship. So the next guy, another Clippers guy in the starters tier, Montrezl Harrell, another unrestricted free agent as well. Harrell, surprisingly still only 26 years old. Definitely going to command a large contract this offseason. I mean, I think he could potentially be up in the $20 to $25 million a year range, which could certainly prove to be too much for the Clippers to afford. If he ends up leaving, I think there's a lot of suitors for Harrell, like young and up and coming teams, like the Atlanta Hawks, the Sacramento Kings, the New Orleans Pelicans, could all really kind of throw a lot of money at Montrezl Harrell. However, I think the Clippers, because considering they're really like in win now mode with Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, I mean, they only have those guys guaranteed for one more year. I think they're really going to want to do anything they can to keep Montrezl Harrell. But I mean, it would be really, it's really kind of interesting to imagine what Harrell could look like on one of those young teams. Like, I mean, coming off the bench behind John Collins and Clint Capella for the Hawks would be just a crazy deep, super talented front court in Atlanta. I mean, yeah, and I mean, playing alongside Zion Williamson in New Orleans as their starting 5 could be a really, really, really interesting combination, just a couple of guys who have really unique skill sets. They could be a super interesting pairing. But again, I think it makes most sense for the Clippers to just pay him. They're especially if it's not a super long-term deal, if it's just a 1 or 2 year contract. I think that would make a lot of sense for the Clippers to just kind of do whatever they can as they're really trying to win now. So the next guy on the starters tier just kind of squeaks into the starters tier this season is Pistons power forward Christian Wood. So he's an unrestricted free agent at the end of this year. Only 25 years old. Really kind of broke out this year for the Pistons, especially after they traded Andre Drummond away. So the Pistons really would be dumb to let Christian Wood walk. They're kind of the team that gave him his chance, so I think he's going to likely want to go back. He's really their best young asset at this point, which is crazy considering how many high draft picks they've had in the recent years. Even with Sekou Demboya and Luke Kennard, and I guess that's pretty much it for their other young assets. I think at this point Christian Wood appears to be the best of those guys. So I think Christian Wood will likely want to go back to the Pistons, and I think they would be smart to have him back. Like I said, he's only 25 years old, so I think he could certainly look to sign a 4 to 5 year contract. And I think if the Pistons were able to lock him down to say a 4 year $60 million or a 5 year $75 million contract, roughly $15 million a year, I think right now that might seem like a slight overpay, but I think by the end of that contract that could be looking like a massive steal, especially if Christian Wood continues to improve rapidly like he has early in his career. Other young teams, I think, like the Knicks or the Hawks or the Bulls, should really be trying to steal Christian Wood away from the Pistons. But the Pistons really need to take advantage and lock him down to a contract that could certainly turn into a steal in a few years. That'll do it for the starters tier. Let's move on to the third tier, which is the role player tier. For power forwards, the deepest tier is actually starters. So this is actually a really solid power forward class if you want a starting level power forward. There's also a lot of role playing power forwards in this tier as well. Like I said, let's get into the role player tier. So the first player in the role player tier is Jabari Parker. Has a player option with the Sacramento Kings for $6.5 million. If I had to guess, he'll probably turn that down. I think he'll probably be trying to get something closer to $10 million, although even if it's only for 1 year, he's only 25 years old. So I think despite his past injury history, I think he can afford to take the risk still at this point in his career. He played really well for the Hawks at the beginning of the year before he was traded to Sacramento, so I think teams liked what they saw. I think if he's in the right system, even if he's coming off the bench, with the Hawks, he kind of played that John Collins role when Collins was out, and he kind of, even at the beginning before Collins was out, he kind of played that John Collins role off the bench just when Collins was sitting, I think he's a really good pick and roll power forward. I think he can be a starter on a decent team, but I think more likely he'll be coming off the bench for a good team. I think he can actually provide really solid minutes. I think if the Hawks want, I think re-signing Jabari Parker again would actually be pretty smart. I think like I was mentioning them with Montrezl Harrell, that's obviously kind of like a home run swing, but if they can't land a guy like that, I think signing Jabari Parker to potentially something like a 1 year, $10 million contract to come off the bench and just kind of fill in those minutes behind or beside John Collins. I think he clearly proved that he works in their system, and I think bringing him back would actually be pretty smart for the Hawks. Or even maybe a team like the Knicks or the Pelicans could take a flyer on him. I know the Knicks just kind of need to take flyers on anyone, and if they're gonna just do something like they did last year and just throw money at anyone that they can because they have it and they don't know what to spend it on, I think Jabari Parker would actually be a really smart guy to throw just $10 million at for a year. Just take a flyer on him. So the next guy in the role player tier is JaMychal Green. So JaMychal Green has a player option for $4.8 million. He could definitely turn it down. I mean, it's pretty unlikely that he gets less than that. I mean, JaMychal Green's a really good role player in the league. So it's unclear if the Clippers really want to re-sign him or not. I think it's going to be dependent on if they re-sign Harrell. I mean, obviously Montrezl Harrell is going to be the priority above JaMychal Green. But, I mean, if they're unable to re-sign Montrezl Harrell, I think they're definitely going to need to re-sign JaMychal Green. So, I mean, I think it's really dependent. But if they really want to re-sign Montrezl Harrell, I think they're probably going to have to let JaMychal Green go. So I think it's really dependent on that, as I said. Assuming they want to re-sign Montrezl Harrell at all costs, that likely means that they want to let JaMychal Green go. I think a couple potential suitors for JaMychal Green could be possibly the Boston Celtics, the Dallas Mavericks, the Utah Jazz, kind of these borderline contending teams that could use just a little bit of front court depth at maybe like a 1 year, $5 million contract. I think might be reasonable for JaMychal Green. I think a team could probably bring that into one of their exceptions, whether it's the biannual exception or the mid-level exception. Next guy in the role players tier is Frank Kaminsky. So the Suns have a team option with Frank Kaminsky for $4.7 million. Quite frankly, I think he played pretty well this year, and I would imagine they will pick up that option. I mean, there's really no risk in them picking him up. It's just one more year for $4.7 million. And I mean, I think at this point, Frank is still pretty young, so I think he could definitely still get better. And at the very least, he plays up to that $4.7 million price tag, which is pretty low. And I think it's not that difficult for him to play that well. And he definitely lived up to it this year, so I think he could certainly replicate it next year for the Suns. So the next guy in the role player tier is another Suns forward, Darius Arch. So Sarge is actually a restricted free agent. I mean, Sarge could certainly garner somewhere between $10 to $15 million. I'm not sure the Suns want to re-sign him, especially if a team is offering him somewhere in that range. He just didn't seem to be the ideal fit alongside DeAndre Ayton, just because both of them don't really play defense. So I think, especially considering how well Sarge has played in the past, I mean, for teams like he did for the Sixers, I think he would probably be a better fit on a better team at this point. I think potentially the Pelicans could be a really cool fit for Darius Arch. I mean, even if he comes off the bench, if you have a starting center playing alongside Zion, and then you slide Zion to the 5 and you bring Darius Arch in and play him at the 4 alongside Zion, I think that could be a really interesting combination. In New Orleans, another team, the Boston Celtics or the Sacramento Kings, could both use a guy like a stretch 4 like Darius Arch, just to provide solid minutes for either of those teams. I mean, the Celtics are more so trying to make a push for a championship, and the Kings are more so just trying to make a push for the playoffs. But either way, I think Sarge could be a valuable player in either of those teams. So the next guy in the role player tier is Juancho Hernangomez. So Hernangomez is a unrestricted free agent with the Timberwolves. So he played really actually like the best basketball of his career for the Wolves in the 14 games he played for them. And considering they clearly wanted him in that trade, that also got them Malik Beasley. I think they're definitely going to want to re-sign him. He's really a perfect fit beside Karl Anthony Towns. So I think similar to Darius Arch, I think a $10 to $15 million a year contract shouldn't be out of the realm of possibility for Juancho. I mean, it seems kind of crazy. I mean, he only played 14 games for them, but I mean, he played super well, and I mean, he's just, like I said, he's a really good fit, besides Karl Anthony Towns. So I think it makes sense. And so actually, the last guy in the role player tier is another Wolves power forward. So it's James Johnson. He's a player option for $14 million with the Timberwolves, and I think it's safe to say he's picking it up. I mean, at this point in his career, James Johnson is not going to be making $14 million anywhere else. And I mean, he's getting older, so I think it just makes sense for him to pick up that $14 million and then possibly sign cheaper deals for the rest of his career. I mean, he seems to be like he might be a minimum guy, a vet minimum guy for the rest of his career after this $14 million contract is up. So I think if he picks it up, he could certainly be a buyout guy this season, depending how well or poorly the Timberwolves play. If they're playing well and they're pushing for the playoffs next season, I think James Johnson may be sticking around there for the year. But if not, I think he could certainly be a potential buyout market guy and could sign halfway through next season with a contending team. So yeah, that does it for the role players tier, and the last tier is the deep bench tier, which only has one guy. So that guy is Harry Giles. Harry Giles is a unrestricted free agent, still only 22 years old, has certainly showed flashes of having upside, and the Sacramento Kings still seem to like him, so I think they'll probably re-sign him. I could imagine him getting between something like $5 to $8 million a year. I'm guessing it's going to be a short-term deal. I don't know. The Kings will probably give him that, but if they don't feel he's worth that type of money on a flyer, other young teams like the Hawks, the Knicks, or the Bulls could certainly be smart to throw that kind of money at Harry Giles just as a flyer, similar to a guy like Jabari Parker. Yeah, so as I mentioned, he's the only guy in the deep bench tier, so that'll do it for the free agent power forward class. Quickly run through the top 15 free agent power forwards again. So we have Anthony Davis, Serge Ibaka, Derek Favors, Bobby Portis, Paul Millsap, Marcus Morris, Montrezl Harrell, Christian Wood, Jabari Parker, Jermichael Green, Frank Kaminsky, Darius Arch, Juancho Hernan-Gomez, James Johnson, and Harry Giles. So as I mentioned, we'll go through the free agent centers next week, and that'll do it for the free agent class of 2020, and then kind of go with the flow after that and kind of see where the NBA is at, potentially look at some recent news, and then hopefully we'll have some games in the near future. No matter which way they come, it'd be nice to have some NBA basketball back in our lives for sure. So that'll do it for this week. Once again, thanks for tuning into ISO Buckets. Remember to like, subscribe, rate, review, all that fun stuff. I would really appreciate it, and I'll talk to you next week.